If we're trying to get something done and we're in our fight or flight response, because I've seen this happen too. Like sometimes people will be sitting there trying to do something for too long. This happens to me. I'll be sitting there trying to do something too long, and then I start to get squirmy and antsy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in my fight or flight response. That I'm not going to be able to focus anymore. I have to get up, take a break, go do something else, get regulated, and then I can come back and work on it. Because if you've ever had that experience, then you know that when you are in your fight or flight response, completely in your fight or flight response, you're not going to be able to focus on the task at hand unless it happens to be fighting or fleeing. So it's important to recognize, oh, I'm in my fight or flight response. I'm not going to be able to focus. The way that we can notice that is if you're feeling anxious or restless or antsy, or you can't focus, you find yourself picking up your phone all of a sudden and fidgeting more than usual.
Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast.
Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that seems to be on everyone's minds, and it has to do with getting stuff done with ADHD. I recently pulled my list of people in my email club, and the number one thing that people wanted to know more about is how to get them to do stuff with ADHD. And obviously, I can't break down the entire list of things that I work with people on doing this, but I want to talk about the two most important pieces. One is what often gets in the way of people doing things. And I guess the other one is too, but both are things that are within our control and that we can learn to work with our brain and the way our brain is wired to help us instead of continuing to fight our ADHD. So if you're having a hard time getting stuff done with your ADHD, then this episode is for you. So let's dig in. There are two big things that I see most people with ADHD struggling with when they're trying to get themselves to do stuff. And the first one's pretty obvious. The first one is that there's a lack of interest. So our nervous systems are wired in a way that if we are not interested in something, it is incredibly hard to get ourselves to do stuff. And in our last episode, we talked about how discipline isn't real and willpower is, we only have so much. And so we don't want to rely on willpower to get ourselves to do stuff. So in order to not have to do that, because we sometimes are going to have to use willpower, so we want to limit how often. In order to not have to use it as much and then keep replenishing it, we can learn how to make things interesting to our ADHD brains. And a lot of this you probably already do, or maybe have an idea of, but maybe you just haven't realized. I will tell you, the one that most of us use without realizing it, especially since we were young, is urgency. Creating a sense of urgency for something, like having a deadline, tends to make something interesting. That's why procrastination, our brains are rewarded by it because it's like, oh, this is exciting now. There's a deadline. And so that is one thing that can make it interesting. The problem is that interferes with our ability to do tasks long term, which is the second piece of what we're going to talk about, is working with the nervous system. But always using urgency as a way to make things interesting is essentially continuing to jack up your nervous system into your fight or flight response to get stuff done. And while that can work sometimes, if that's the main way you get stuff done, you're going to get burned out pretty quickly. So there are other ways that we want to spread out the ways that we make things interesting. One way is through novelty. So obviously the first time you do something, or let's say you just joined a program. I just launched my program Ascend, and I sent out an email to everyone. I was like, listen, the people who do well in this, they hit the ground running because right now this program is shiny and new and fun and novel. And so your brain is interested in it. And so if this is you, whether you've just bought a new book or you joined a new program or you, I don't know what else people do, you got a new lawnmower, like, I don't know, got seeds to plant in your garden, right after you you get that right after the purchase is the time to do it because now you're excited, right? How many of us have things that sit in our house that we're like, oh yeah, I bought that. And I don't know, it sounded really fun when I bought it, but now it's been a couple of years. It's just been sitting there, right? It's because we didn't act on the excitement and the novelty. So now it's just one of the things in our house collecting dust, right? Or in your shed. If you're like me, I've got some stuff in my shed where I'm like, why did I buy that? Right? And so we want to create novelty or take advantage of novelty when it's there. It's really important. I have a book buying problem. I'm not going to lie. I have a horrible book buying problem in the sense that every time I see a book that I would like to read, I'm like, yes, I need that one too. I need it. I need it now. And of course, there's all kinds of fun things lighting up in our ADHD brains when we buy stuff, even when we don't have an ADHD brain, so that just the act of buying it often will feel rewarding to our brain. It's just that then we actually also want to read it. And if you're like me and you have all these unread books, it's because you bought it when you didn't have time to start it right away. And so then it loses its luster from the original conversation when the book was mentioned. So we would be much wiser to keep a list. And I do keep a list of things, but sometimes I go haywire. I've done this before, and then every once in a while I'll have a little splurge or a period of time where I'll just buy books. But if we keep a list of books that we think we might be interested in, and then once we finish the book we have, then we go buy one, then it's new and novel and we're excited to read it, right? We're more likely to. It's just that sometimes if you're like me, you're like, no, I must have book now. So novelty is one way that we can work with our nervous system that's interest-based. Another one is to create a challenge or some kind of competition for ourselves. There was someone I used to follow who he would talk about trying to get his son to clean his room. And he was like, I wonder if you can clean your room as fast as Superman. How long do you think Superman takes to clean his room? And he's 10 minutes. Do you think you can beat his time? And he'd set the stopwatch, right? Because it's a challenge. And the funny thing is, like, used to do this with my ADHD brain without even realizing it. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can get all my morning stuff in the kitchen done before my tea is done. Because I make this like special Ayurvedic digestive tea that you brew for 10 minutes. And I'm like, ooh, let's see if I can get it all done. And that kind of makes it fun and challenging. And then I actually am more likely to complete all those tasks and stay focused because now it's interesting. So one more way that we'll mention, there's, I don't know, two or three more that I tend to teach a lot. But the one other thing I'll mention is building in connection. When we create connection inside of the things we need to do, whether that's by body doubling. I know in college I used to study with people, and it was just the act of sitting with someone that made it easier. Even in my actuarial days, we would sit and study together, and it made it so much easier to sit down and study. Reading Life Contingencies wasn't exactly the most interesting read for me. So it was nice to be sitting there with some of my fellow actuarial students that we were working towards similar goals, even if not taking the same exam. So body doubling is huge. And I recently was talking about this with someone, and I knew a client of mine knew someone who had a body doubling thing. And I spoke to this person today, and she was like, I don't remember what that one was, but there's these really cool people who offer it. So if you're on my email list, I'm going to try and send that out as my fourth Friday email in June and include something I've watched by them where they talk about their body doubling app or something like that. But there's all kinds of body doubling communities inside of Ascend. We offer that because when you're working alongside of someone who's doing the same task, a similar task, or even just working, it's a lot easier to stay focused because that energy, you're all focusing each other together and you're putting connection into your task, which makes it interesting for your ADHD brain. All right, those are just a few of the ways that you can create interest in the task you're doing to make it more likely that you're going to get yourself to do it in the first place. But here's the deal. You heard me reference the nervous system, and this is essential. And before I get into the how, I want to talk about why it's so essential. But first, I have to talk about the nervous system itself, right? The autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has a lot of functions. It definitely helps us be able to digest our food and be able to get stuff done and things like that. but it also helps us with protection. There are three main responses in the autonomic nervous system. They are the ventral vagal response, where we feel safe enough to rest, digest, and connect. The next one is the sympathetic nervous system, and oftentimes it's equated to the fight or flight response, though there's other things going on there. And the third one is the dorsal vagal response, which is most often equated with a shutdown response. And you've heard of the freeze response, which is actually a blended state between the fight or flight response and the shutdown response, because you can see some of the shutdown, but there's also the sympathetic activation of the heart beating really fast and still wanting to flee, but maybe being like that deer in the headlights, right? So the thing about the autonomic nervous system is it's not as simple as just the safe enough to rest and digest and connect, fight or flight, and shutdown responses, because there can be blended states, and those states are involved in things, like I said, like digestion, getting tasks done, and other things. So it's important to recognize that as I talk about them today, I am oversimplifying them for the purpose of understanding how they play into our ability to get stuff done with ADHD. So we are meant as humans to primarily be in the ventral vagal response, the part where we feel safe enough to connect, rest, and digest. That is what we are meant to stay in most of the time. And then to blip into our fight or flight response when we perceive a threat. And then if the threat is ongoing and it seems like all hope is lost and our death or pain is imminent, right? Like it's coming, then we go into our dorsal vagal shutdown response, which basically numbs out physical and emotional pain, which is a good thing if, for example, you're going to be eaten alive by a bear, right? So these responses, we're going to overly simplify them in terms of how they protect us. Because what I want us to understand, when your nervous system or your brain, your wiring, suspects danger, when you perceive danger, there's about, I can't remember how many seconds, if it's 3 to 5 seconds or 3 to 5 milliseconds, like it's fast, where you're able to recognize like, oh, fight or flight response, am I in danger? But it's really fast and you have to have really good self-awareness to notice it, right? Within those 3 to 5, I think it is 3 to 5 seconds, so I could be wrong. It might be milliseconds, so don't quote me. Within those 3 to 5 seconds, we'll say, you have an opportunity to stop it. But after that, your body gets flooded with things like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, also known as norepinephrine. And those things are there to help you fight or flee. At that time, all of your secondary systems are deprioritized. I don't know that they're entirely shut down, but they are deprioritized, because at this point, the only thing that matters is that you get to safety. If your nervous systems were in danger, like a tiger's chasing us, it doesn't matter if you digest the food in your belly, can get pregnant, can fight off the flu bug, because if you don't get away from this tiger, you're going to die. And all that other stuff is irrelevant. So the first priority then is getting to safety. Well, let's think about that. If you're in your fight or flight response, is focusing on a task that you need to do, like for your business, really essential? If your nervous system thinks you're trying to run from a tiger, because remember, our nervous system doesn't know the difference between a tiger chasing us and a project we have to get done that we have procrastinated, or just, I don't know, we're just trying to get something done, right? Our brain doesn't know the difference. And so what can happen is if we're trying to get something done and we're in our fight or flight response, because I've seen this happen too. Like sometimes people will be sitting there trying to do something for too long. This happens to me. I'll be sitting there trying to do something too long, and then I start to get squirmy and antsy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in my fight or flight response. That I'm not going to be able to focus anymore. I have to get up, take a break, go do something else, get regulated, and then I can come back and work on it. Because if you've ever had that experience, then you know that when you are in your fight or flight response, completely in your fight or flight response, you're not going to be able to focus on the task at hand, unless it happens to be fighting or fleeing. So it's important to recognize, oh, I'm in my fight or flight response. I'm not going to be able to focus. The way that we can notice that is If you're feeling anxious or restless or antsy, or you can't focus, you find yourself picking up your phone all of a sudden and fidgeting more than usual. We fidget, but like when it gets just, it feels almost, I don't want to say wiry, but like almost like a tornado in your chest-ish, where you're just like, like that sound almost describes it. And when you're feeling that way, often it can be your body's fight or flight response that's activated. And in that moment, you're not going to be able to get yourself to focus. Maybe you can get some stuff done, but it's going to take you way longer than if you stopped what you're doing, paused, took a break, 5-10 minutes, go for a walk, hug a tree, look at nature, do some yoga, pet your dog or cat or lizard. I don't know why lizard came into my mind. A bearded dragon or whatever you got going on. But let yourself have a break, some time away, and regulate your nervous system. So then when you come back, you will be able to focus on what's at hand. Because really, to be able to focus on the stuff you need to do for your business, it's best if you are mostly in your ventral vagal response. There will be a little bit of a blend a lot of times when we're doing stuff with our fight or flight response. It's just that if that's dominant, it's going to be really hard. Now, there's another time when it's going to be hard to get ourselves to do stuff, and that's if we're in our dorsal vagal or shutdown response. That shutdown response, like I said before, is there to protect us when it seems like all hope is lost, when it seems like that the tiger is chasing us, is going to catch us. So our body is like, well, crap, I better turn off those pain signals, because if a tiger is going to eat me alive, I sure as hell don't want to feel that. And so like our ability to think clearly is not something that stays online when our body is perceiving that level of threat, right? That life-ending danger. So when we are feeling shut down, that can feel like disconnect, dissociation, depression, low mobility, like low energy. When we're feeling that, it's going to be really hard to focus on the thing you're trying to do. So the way to get out of that is any kind of movement at all. When you're in your shutdown response, because it is protection through mobilization, any movement at all, even visualizing movement, can help you get out of that state. Now, it's important to note that number one, you don't want to shift out of your protective states unless it's safe enough to do so. But secondly, when you shift out of your shutdown response, your dorsal vagal response, it's possible that you'll pop into your fight or flight response, your sympathetic nervous system. So you want to be prepared to regulate from there too. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to do that over and above the things that I've mentioned. In your shutdown response, like I said, any movement at all. So going for a walk, you could do some breath work if you can get yourself to do it. Even visualizing going for a walk, looking outside if you can't get yourself to do anything will help, right? If you can at least stand outside and breathe in the nature, hug a tree, like anything like that is going to start to pull you out of your shutdown response. When you are in your fight or flight response, because that is protection through mobilization, we need fluid movement with breath. So a walk that isn't frenetic, right? Some yoga. What I like is volcano breathing, because you can use that for both the shutdown response and the fight or flight response. And I'm going to walk you through how to do that right now, even though you're not going to be able to see me. So volcano breathing, it comes from yoga calm. You place your hands together, your palms together in front of your heart, in front of your chest, your breastbone or sternum. And then as you inhale, reach your arms all the way up overhead. On an exhale breath, bring your arms down around by your sides and back to center. That's one round. And you can do that 3 times or more to help you get more regulated and perhaps get you back to that ventral vagal response. Sometimes you might need a longer break than doing that just 3 times. Sometimes a walk will help too. But getting in these kinds of activities will help you regulate, because when your nervous system is regulated, it is going to be way easier for you to focus than when it's not. And what I've found is that when I'm dysregulated, I can get myself to do stuff. I'm pretty good at forcing myself to do stuff. However, it takes way more energy and it takes 5 times longer. And I tend to make many more mistakes. And so this is important that we're noticing like, okay, I'm starting to make a lot of mistakes, or I'm feeling like things aren't clear, or I don't know what to do, or whatever. When you start to notice confusion, or I don't know, or whatever it is, then it's time for you to take a break, do some volcano breathing, go for a walk, look outside, whatever it is, so that you can get regulated and refocus. As part of this, one of the things I want to talk about that's bonus content for this podcast episode, and you've heard me talk about this in the past, especially when I interviewed Sally Crew on an old episode, the time of day that you choose to do tasks matter. And I don't mean the o'clock. I mean your energy clock time of day. So for me, I do best to get up in the morning. I do my writing and my gratitude journal and my meditation and exercising and yoga in the morning, and I start work at 10. And then when I start work, that is the perfect time for me to do creative tasks like doing my podcast, writing an email to y'all, whatever it is, creating a freebie. Those kind of things happen best at that time of day for me. And then the little piddly stuff I do better in the afternoon. Some people do better the other way around. And so there's no way for me to know what's best for you. But what you can do is start to pay attention. When am I most efficient with what kind of task? Because there's different kinds of tasks. There's tech tasks, there's like creative tasks like writing or podcasting or copywriting, creating social media posts, whatever it is that you do, creating content for the people in your programs, or even having meetings, like time one-on-one with people. When is the best time for you to do that? I tend to do my best work meeting with people in the afternoon because by then I've gotten the stuff I need to get done out of the way. So it's no longer on my mind and I can be more present with those people. Unless it's a client only day, and then I can start meeting with people at 10, which is fine. But my point is, no one knows what this is for you. So the third kind of bonus way that I'm going to or that I'm sharing about for you to get stuff done with ADHD is to get to know your own energy level and when it is best for you to do the different kinds of tasks. And if you're like, I don't even know what I have to do, then what I would suggest is you sit down and you make a list, like all the things you need to do in your business. Try not to get overwhelmed. You can make them on different pieces of paper. You could have tech-related tasks, creativity-related tasks, right? That way it's not as overwhelming on one piece of paper. People-related tasks, right? You could have working with client, like serving related tasks, and then you could have the networking related tasks as separate because maybe those are different. And then separate those tasks out and start to notice, like, when is it that I am most efficient with those tasks? And if you find yourself doing a task, if I do end up doing like an email in the afternoon, and I'm like, wow, this is just dragging. I am not doing well with this. You might have a dysregulated nervous system. You can go for a walk and try again. Or you might also jot down and be like, hey, afternoon, not the best time for me to write an email to my people. So the important thing is to get to know yourself, both in terms of how to generate interest so that you want to do tasks that you need to do, especially those boring tasks that you're like, I don't want to do that. You either got to delegate those, delete them, see if you really need them, or create interest to get yourself to do it and then do it at the right time of day. And to know when you're dysregulated so you can bring yourself into regulation and be more productive, more effective during the time you do decide to focus on. So if you are interested in learning more on how to get yourself to do stuff with ADHD, I've got a free guide, the 5-step task master plan, that there's information in the show notes. You can make sure you grab that. It does mention some of this stuff as well as a couple other steps for you. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. If you're not following already, be sure to follow and take care.